Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
You're
Welcome to, all right, good stuff. We'll do that. We'll start that again. Welcome to Planning Committee of Barrie City Council. Tonight's Planning Committee meeting is being held virtually with members of Planning Committee, Executive Management Team, and the City Clerk participating via video conference. The senior leadership team are not visible, but are on the call to answer questions. We have two items on tonight's agenda. First, we have a presentation on a matter of some import, which is our new draft official plan. So we will do that first of all. The second item on tonight's business is the deferred business, which is a zoning bylaw amendment application for 407 to 419 Mapleview Drive West. I know there are some folks watching tonight for that matter that will come up immediately following the presentation. And that is, those are the two items on tonight's agenda. So with that, and knowing that we do have members of the public who will be waiting for the Mapleview Drive item tonight, we do want to have the full presentation by staff. I do want to give members of Planning Committee the chance to ask questions. But just a note on process with this official plan, we're treating this a little bit like the budget. Tonight is the initial presentation and an opportunity to ask some questions. But we're not going to be debating the matter tonight. This is just for information. And so what I would just ask of Planning Committee, maybe limit your questions to the few most important that you want to raise in the public meeting tonight, but know that you have the next 3 weeks in which to ask more questions of staff, and we will then publicly debate the official plan at the next Planning Committee or the Planning Committee meeting in 3 weeks. So no need to try and get through what may be a long list of issues or questions tonight, but rather maybe focus those questions on things that you might want to get the answers to over the next 3 weeks, and we'll go from there. And hopefully we'll get to the matter, the planning application matter, not too late tonight as well. Okay, so with all of that by way of process, welcome to our Director of Planning, somebody who's put a pile of work into this project and all of the predecessor work that went into it. Ms. Banfield, welcome to Planning Committee, and I will give you the floor.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. And I certainly hope that my screen is sharing now. So, okay, that's perfect. As always, thank you for the introduction. And it's always my pleasure to speak to Planning Committee. And certainly this topic is near and dear to my heart. And I can't talk about this topic without a trip down memory lane to just remind everybody that, you know, this began in the fall of 2018. So just tipped over about 3 years worth of work, 2 years of it in a global pandemic, but we continued to forge ahead. And really, we've said from the very beginning that this was going to be a new official plan. It was not a spit polish of our 2009 official plan. It was new. And we have presented so many different drafts already to not only the public, but to the community. And that began in September of 2020 with the first version in 90 days for the community and council to take a look at it. Then we refined that version further in May of 2021, and that was the version that we did the statutory consultation, the open house, the public meeting. We refined that version even further based on that comment, those comments, and issued a tracked changes in a working version in September. We continued to whittle away and work and finesse the policy wording to a version that we issued in December 2021. And that version even changed slightly from the version that we released last week. I fully expect that there will probably be changes between the version that you got last week and what's presented to you in February for your consideration. Don't worry, all those changes will be highlighted for you and documented in the planning report. But really, as Mayor Lehman said, tonight it really was to give you a body of work to go through, to tell you why each piece is important and what it means to the official plan process, but really not asking you for any decisions this evening. And I think it's just important to note that the official plan is definitely more than one document. And to get to where we are tonight, there were several things that the city had to do. Obviously, as city staff, we guided those actions. So we had to do a municipal comprehensive review. We had to look at our land's needs. And there were certain statutory consultation requirements we had to meet. But then there were so many things in addition to that that we actually did, that we did more than just tick those required boxes. You know, staff along with council considered employment land conversions, and that was looking at some lands that have been historically designated for employment lands that never really became employment lands. So we looked at whether or not we should reevaluate those. We had tons and tons of consultation, additional consultation, more than we certainly would need to, including up until last fall where we had the additional town hall meeting. And we've worked very closely as a development services team with the rest of the city departments. So all of those pieces kind of go together and form the official plan. And that's what we basically released late last week rather. So I'm going to go over these couple of appendices really quickly with you to say, just to tell you, as I said, a bit about why they're important. So obviously Appendix A is the official plan, and that's the parent document, the vision between now and 2051. And that's important. And really, since this journey began, we collectively, people that municipalities in Ontario got a new growth plan, got updated population and employment targets. We adjusted our versions of the official plan to those outermost limits, those limits that we've been given by the province up to 2051, 30 years into the future, to take the city to the 298,000 people and 150,000 jobs. You are still hearing right now lots of feedback and still lots of comments on the official plan, and I'll be happy to talk to you a little about those later. The second piece that we're sharing with you is a robust document about all the consultation and engagement that took place. Again, some of these documents, some of these appendices you've seen before at different times, but given the fact, as I said, that the journey began in 2018, I'm just kind of putting the story all together again for you. So you were part of the consultation. Many of you attended our workshops and certainly attended the public meetings. So you know how much engagement went into this, this document, and that comes together in that Appendix B. Appendix C is totally planner ease. It's the growth plan conformity chart. It's a policy by policy tick box of what our official plan has to address and or it doesn't apply to us. The lands needs assessment is actually where we started, and that takes a look at how much land do we need to accommodate the people and jobs. And finally, the Municipal Comprehensive Review, which also is a big document, and it takes a look at specifically, if we have these people and we have these jobs, how do we fit them in our municipality? Can we service them? And so, as I said, the January 2022 version even changed a little bit from the December version. Continued consultation, as I said, myself and my team are still meeting with property owners and stakeholders. Despite so many eyes looking at this document, there still were some errors and some typos that we captured after we published. And we did, I did want to reflect on this. We did update the phasing policies in the secondary plan areas, in the DGA, our designated greenfield area. Council may recall that came out of discussion and direction council gave us to look at that phasing as it tied into the long range financial plan. So the biggest change there is moving from phase to phase. We want to see registrations of draft plan approvals, not just draft plan approvals. Appendix B, as again, is really quite a robust summary of all the consultation and the countless hours that we had. Again, it talks about, again, the people we had to consult with, the people we wanted to consult with, different ways to engage different members of our community and different stakeholders. And you have in there that very robust comment matrix. You know, someone said this, we looked at it, we made this change, or we didn't, and here's why. Lots of material in there, and it really has been quite a journey, and it's been fantastic to hear from our community and our stakeholders throughout this process. Again, the growth plan conformity chart, really, our official plan has to comply to the growth plan. You hear that from us all the time. We have to plan to 2051. We have to accommodate these people and jobs. So this really is a policy by policy check against the growth plan, and the province is going to be very interested in this part of the official plan package. The land needs study, well, it's Appendix D. It actually was one of the very first things that we did when we said, okay, now let's remember back at the very beginning, we did our lands needs based on the 2041 numbers that were a little bit less than our 2051 numbers. So we've actually had to look at our lands needs a couple times. We made a couple of changes to it and amendments. Again, all that's in Appendix D. We have our main document. We have the addendum that we made when we looked at the employment land conversion. Because land needs is all about how much land is vacant and how many people and jobs can we fit on this vacant land and fill in to get those people in our municipal boundary. That's not changing. So we did have an addendum for that. And I've mentioned before, we did get 2051 numbers just before the release of our September 2020 version. And so we did an addendum to say, you know, how can we bridge that 10-year gap? And then finally, our Appendix E is our municipal comprehensive review. And really what it does is take a look at servicing, but in the broadest sense of the word, in the sense of, you know, we're going to have these people, we're going to have these jobs, where are they going to fit? Do we have the infrastructure? And not just water, wastewater, not just the pipes in the ground, parks, libraries, fire halls, community centers. It really looks at everything. So I want to say, if you flip through this document, you're going to see that a lot of our master plans don't go to 2051. And that's because we just got, you know, 2051 numbers. And I want to just let everybody know that that's not every municipality in Ontario that is covered by the growth plan got the same numbers at the same time. And everybody is doing effectively the same thing we are. They're doing their lands needs. They're doing their MCRs. They can't update all their master plans at the same time. It just is practically impossible. So that's where we're taking a look at. So you'll see through there, we'll say, well, we've only planned to 2041. But again, as I say, well, this document's to take us to 2051. That's 30 years from now, and this is not going to be the last official plan. Our infrastructure team is, and our asset management team are poised to start the master plan review for all of our master plans, if not this year, the early part of next year. And as I said, we'll be able to bridge that gap of infrastructure, at least from a planning perspective, you know, within the next couple of years. And so ultimately, I continue to say that the official plan is a foundational document. It is new, it's different. This document, while it plans to 2051, it will not be our last official plan. The Planning Act requires that municipalities look at their official plans. And again, because we know the full suite of master plans are going to be coming hot on the heels of this official plan, we know that we'll be looking at it, you know, certainly well before 2051. So I'm going to end there. As the mayor had indicated, no decisions are being requested of you this evening. We will be coming back to you with the staff report February 8th. I know certainly some people in the community have thought that the decision was going back to council in January. That's not the case. As I said, we'll be going to planning committee February 8th, a subsequent planning committee a subsequent council meeting in February as well. And in the meantime, I encourage all members of council to use this email address that was included in the memo, but it's new.barryop@barry.ca, and questions will be answered and responded to all members of council, as again, much like budget. So that's it for my formal presentation. So I will stop sharing my screen. As always, members of council, in addition to reaching out through this email, are always able to reach out to myself and staff, and we can answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Banfield. There's certainly literally thousands of pages of material here. The plan itself is almost 300 pages, and then the supporting material. So there is a lot of detail, and I know members of committee will be sorting through some of that over the coming weeks. But tonight we do have the opportunity now for some questions on the presentation of the documents. Deputy Mayor Ward, go ahead.
I just have one question, and that's if you could summarize what's in this new official plan that will encourage more affordable housing in the city of Barrie.
Sure, I can definitely summarize that. And there is a section in the official plan that talks about some different things. So it does lay the foundation for us to almost as soon as this official plan gets approved to take a look at doing an official plan amendment to do inclusionary zoning around our transit stations. which is huge. We do have policies in here that, while we still have kept the 10% overall target, we have increased that percentage to 20% in other areas, specifically, again, around, sorry, I'm gonna look forward here. So some additional percentages in other areas, as well as proposals that have more than 40 units proposed. The intention is that it will be, that the affordable housing will be provided as part of that project. So sorry, the 20% is in the MTSAs and the UGC. So there's definitely some, while the policies previously in the existing official plan were just 10% global, there's about 3 or 4 different ways that we're trying to tackle affordable housing in the new official plan.
Yeah, I know I said I was only going to ask one question, but I just followed up. This explain exclusionary zoning, especially around the transit stations, what that will mean.
Sure, it's actually inclusionary zoning is the term, and that ends up being a full-on requirement to have it. It's not a target, it's not a goal, it's not a nice to have, it's a requirement.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Ward. Councillor Owen, I suspect the Deputy Mayor might have beat you to one of your questions, but go ahead.
You got it. Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Yeah, I was actually going to ask exactly that about the about affordable housing and the major transit station areas. But I do have another question about the affordable housing targets and how they've changed between drafts. So we saw in an original draft higher targets, and then now they've been lowered. I'm wondering if you can explain the justification for that, considering the great need that we have in our city for affordable housing.
For sure, through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Aylwin. So there was a change from the 30% in the UGC MTSA to 20%. Definitely that was that 30% number. We did get a lot of feedback from people saying it was very high. So we were really trying at a staff level, trying to balance that. At the same time, because so much time has transpired, we had done the annual reporting for the affordable housing, and the existing target is 10%. And a numbers by numbers statistics basis, we were actually meeting those targets. Notwithstanding everything that we all know about the on the ground situation, from a perspective of a statistics perspective, we actually were meeting those targets. So really what it was just, as I said, balancing the comments that we'd heard on that first draft.
Okay, thanks for that answer. And that makes me think of a follow-up question on that piece. So if we were meeting those targets, why not try for a higher target, considering the situation, the affordable housing situation has only gotten worse?
Through you again, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Aylwin, it is just like pretty much everything in planning, and it's balance. It's all about balance. And as I said, really where we thought was, having the same target, the 10%, increasing to 20%, adding the extra provision of more than 40 units, have to have it in-house, as part of the proposal. And then with the full intention of doing the inclusionary zoning. We know that there's so many different ways that we want to attack affordable housing. And so, as I said, it wasn't just kind of a one thing. It was, we put so many different things to try to advance affordable housing in the city.
And my final question, just following up on the inclusionary zoning piece and the protected major transit station areas, is there any way for us to expedite that process and do it through this official plan rather than doing it through an official plan amendment?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Aylwin. So staff did look at that. Inclusionary zoning does require quite a bit of background supporting studies and rationale, and we just didn't think that, quite frankly, we could do it at the same time. We talked to the province about this, probably 2 versions ago, and they inclusionary zoning is still very new. And if we're all following the Toronto example really closely, we're going to try to learn from their examples. So at this point, as I said, it's staff's intention for it to be OPA 1, but not at exactly the same time.
Thank you. That's it for my questions for now.
Thanks, Councillor Owen. Other questions for Ms. Banfield? Councillor Riepma, and sorry, I saw Councillor Congo before. I know you indicated, and then Councillor. Go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Ms. Banfield. So coming hot off the heels on the task force recommendations that were ratified at council, is there anything within those recommendations where we would need to see any changes to the language in the official plan that would enable those pieces to occur? One example that's top of mind on this conversation of affordable units and those targets would be, if we went down the route of looking at cash in lieu of affordable housing, are there firm targets to be clear about the number of units expected that we would be looking at a formula to actually calculate a cost that we would then charge to be able to reallocate those funds to different housing projects?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Kungle. So certainly some of the references in the official plan are captured in the housing affordability task force. Cash in lieu of part of affordable housing is one. The inclusionary zoning, looking at a community benefit bylaw that our Nowhere Finance Department is. So a lot of those things do definitely tie in. We do understand that while the OP is the visionary document to, as I said, lay out all that foundation, there are going to be implementation pieces to the official plan that are going to be required. And this looking at how we can do the cash in lieu of affordable housing is definitely a priority.
In follow up to that, if I may, Mayor Lehman, to Ms. Banfield. So in the current OP, the language tied to affordable housing is kind of a 10% recommendation. Is there stronger language that's in this OP that sets a firm target that then we're going to be able to use to set expectations about if that's not available through a development, or is that something we're going to have to refine just so we don't lose an opportunity? Should we make that change to then say, well, what was the limit? What was the target? You weren't really intentional in the document. Is there firm language that sets a target?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Kungle, you're exactly right. The policy that we have right now is a 10% overall. And so again, it's not about per development. And if you think about this official plan, the current one being, initiated around 2009, and you think about the city at that time, shifts in the built form, when we started seeing things like townhouses and the first few low-rise apartment buildings and condos, that shift in built form really was enough, if you will, to trigger those affordability pieces. And so for a long time, just our built form, the change of our built form was enough to kind of create more affordable housing. And that's not the case anymore. And that's why in this OP, we are as firm as we can be in terms of the targets, in terms of increasing them in particular areas for sites that are greater than 40 units to have them on site, and then to reference, the CBC and inclusionary zoning and almost like every other, it's kind of like your exercise regime when you do, 10 bicep curls every single day for 10 years, and then all of a sudden, you're stagnant. And that's kind of where we are with the affordable housing. We know that one thing is not going to be enough to really move that needle. And it's everything. We're basically, as I said, throwing every tool and resource that we have at it to try to, along with obviously the work that the task force did and updating the strategy.
And I have another question. If I may. So many of us are sitting on several advisory committees, and you've done, and the team's done a great job engaging those committees like active transportation and sustainability and seniors around the OP. Some have been heavily involved. So while we still have a couple weeks to give feedback, I'm sure I'm expecting the question about, do we get a last chance to kind of do any follow-up? So can you speak to the process, or, you know, should we as representatives on committees be engaging or helping to facilitate those questions forward through us? Or should we just be sending out that email to submit the questions through our committees?
So through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Kungle, you know, staff have not stepped away from the pen yet. There are still, you know, I do fully expect there to be more comments coming in and more refinements. What I will share with you, though, is that, you know, certainly people that have provided us comments before, you know, often they come back to us and say, you didn't use our comment, or you didn't reflect it. And sometimes, oh yeah, we did this, or we did this. So, you know, we have really, to the greatest extent possible, incorporated as many changes to the OP based on those feedback, because it's not, staff are really, we're the conduit. We're taking everybody's input and the technical piece and trying to come up with a vision for 30 years for the whole city. So by all means, it's definitely not too late. But I would say that we pretty much are getting to the point where we are moving, I guess, from big picture vision to kind of closer down to the policy, if that makes sense to you.
That does, thank you. And I've got one final question, and through you, Mayor Lehman, it may be more about process, not specific to just our OP, but my question is about how are we looking at or considering official plans by our bordering municipalities? So while we sit as a separate city, you know, we're definitely hearing, especially even in our town halls recently, about traffic flow based on development in bordering communities. And so how does our policy and incentives to develop, you know, while we're doing that around our boundary lines, you know, do we look at or review and forecast issues or opportunities around servicing or impact around development on our borders?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Kungle. So from the perspective of the official plan, you know, the official plan is obviously for the municipal for land within the municipal boundary, and we do have some policies in there that, you know, talk about you know, seeing lower densities on our fringe, if you will, because obviously our neighbors mostly are more rural than we are. In terms of some of the stuff you're talking about, servicing and transportation, you know, those are things that are looked at more actually through our infrastructure master plans. You know, kind of infiltration, traffic infiltration, you know, those sorts of things. We are often approached by our neighbors to extend and look at extending our services and those sorts of things. And those are like hard services. And in some instances, council, those would always come to council. And in some instances, council have said yes. And then in other instances, council maybe haven't necessarily even been asked officially, but just kind of, but for this point, as I said, we definitely factor it all in. But the city of Barrie is really the urban center for Simcoe County, and will, you know, be more increasingly urban into the future.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thanks, Councillor Kungle. Councillor Riepma.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Ms. Banfield, and all your staff for all the work that you've done. There's a pile of paper here, and there's certainly been an awful lot of work done. So I really appreciate the effort that's gone into it. And you know what? You're going to get a whole lot of other ideas as well that you'll have to wrestle to the ground. And one of those has to do with affordable housing. You've already had, I think, 3 or 4 questions on that. I'm not going to belabor that, but I think that I will send you some questions about it. And I'm thinking particularly about, you know, why 10% and why not 15% or some other percentage? Like, is that just because it's a round number? And also around the 40 unit minimum. But we can do that offline because I think I'd like to see some movement in that direction. My question is, can I get you to do a little more work? This plan makes a lot of changes. You know, like permissions to go to 4 stories on local or on collector roads, for example. Can you put together either a map or a very short document that is very consumer friendly, that tells people exactly what the changes are going to be. Because I want to be very sure that, 6 months from now, after this is all done, people will not come to council and say, oh, gee, I had no idea that this was in the plan. So I would really love to have, and it doesn't have to be fancy, it just needs to be very consumer friendly. Do you think that's possible to do that in the next little bit?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Rietma, absolutely. We certainly have done different things to, we have what's called like a community structure explainer, and we have that, and we have a cheat sheet in terms of which designations permit which heights, and that would be something that would be relatively easy to make into something in bite-sized pieces, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it would just be really helpful for the general public to be able to say, oh yeah, as far as my property, and that's really where everybody looks at first. My property is exactly the same, or it's different in some way. So I appreciate that a lot. And the second item along the same lines is, I am certain that some of the properties are going to, if you will, lose entitlements. In other words, and I don't know whether in the official plan terminology, it's not legal non-conforming, but there are some properties that are going to conform to the plan today, but will not conform in the future. And again, for those property owners, I think it's important that we identify those. So I wonder if I can ask a second favor of you, and if you could do some kind of a map or document or both that would identify those.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Rietma, we have policies in the official plan that talk about existing uses continuing to be permitted. And so none of those uses that are existing today would actually factor into a legal non-conforming situation. Existing uses, we've got provisions for existing approvals and any other implementing approvals. So there really aren't properties that, with some very few exceptions, and I can absolutely put something together for council about, I guess, that concept of if you're losing permissions, but staff see it a little bit differently than that, but I will definitely put some thoughts together and try to crystallize, I think, what you're trying to get at.
Okay, thanks. I think at this point that would be very helpful. So appreciate that.
Thanks, Councillor Rietma. I'm just going to actually jump in and ask a sort of supplemental on that, because I had a similar concern, and I had it brought to my attention that in the employment areas, the change in designations could result in that kind of a circumstance with the new designations of employment sort of dash commercial and employment industrial. I guess, Ms. Banfield, based on your answer to Councillor Rietma, though, my question would be, the next step, of course, is to write a zoning bylaw to implement this plan. If the designations are changing, but existing uses are permitted to continue, how are you going to reconcile that in a zoning bylaw?
Through you, Mayor, to you, Mayor Lehman, sorry. As I said, really, staff have taken a look at that in a very, in particular as it relates to the employment land and the non-industrial, non-employment industrial and industrial employment. And as I said, the idea was that the zoning bylaw would obviously reflect what is permitted in the obviously in the OP designation, but there's no intention to the way the zoning bylaw is done now in terms of the industrial, it says there's industrial uses, there's some commercial uses, or institutional uses, and some of them may be permitted in different areas of the designation. But as I said, I think that the zoning bylaw really is just going to can actually do exactly the same thing. Existing uses are permitted, and then can continue to categorize the uses. The intention of this official plan was never to disadvantage existing operating plazas or entities in the city of Barrie. It really is trying to obviously provide some direction if those areas come up for redevelopment, and then obviously direction if there's some vacant land. So that's really, as I said, staff, the position is not to disadvantage existing and operating businesses, or as I said, or plazas. It really is for redevelopment and for vacant land.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, Councillor Riepma, were you, did you have additional questions, or was that the end for tonight? I think you said you'd leave it there tonight.
I'll leave it there for now.
Yeah, okay.
I in terms of the sort of quotation marks, legal non-conforming question, I'm comforted by Ms. Manfield's comments that there are only a few properties, but I think I'd still like to see that list, just because I think it's important for the property owners to know that.
Sure, thanks, Councillor Riepma. Other questions from Ms. Banfield? Councillor Jim Harris.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I apologize if this is redundant. I was looking at the document and may have missed a question, and I think it might have been Councillor Kungle who asked it. So if it's a repeat, I apologize. It relates to the recognition in the presentation, Ms. Banfield, through you, if this hasn't been answered, through you, Mayor Lehman and Ms. Banfield. You mentioned about the potential for more change, and this is a massive document and has had a significant consultation, and I see 615 pages in the report that talks about consultation and engagement, so it's incredible. But the question I had was related to the potential for change and what formal or informal methods are still available that might elicit change in the final document. I'm not sure if that was asked earlier. I apologize if it was. Okay.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Harris, it was about, referencing the use of the email that I had suggested earlier, to send questions through there. And then, we are continuing as our members of council to get letters and feedback continually, and staff continue to look at them. And as I said, there still may be some movement, but what I did say to Councillor Kungle is, we're kind of out of the visionary, what do you want to see kind of stage of the product document, if you will, and kind of almost getting to the point of, what's wrong with this number in the policy, if you will. So we are getting closer to the ground in terms of crystallizing that policy. But, certainly I've spoken to some members of council that have said, oh, can we tweak this or can we tweak that? And the answer is absolutely. It's still, even when you get to a document that's presented to you in February, council may see fit to make amendments just like you do to budget.
Thank you so much for reconfirming that. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Any other questions for Ms. Banfield? Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. My question's in regards to the commercial district areas that have been designated, and more specifically on my side of the highway in Ward 7. Because through the different versions of the draft, the shape and size of it has changed significantly. And I've had quite a few property owners in the area obviously reach out to me with some concern, especially those that in the original draft were included because originally it went across Mapleview on the south side. And now it's been kind of enclosed more of a north-south and everything on the east side of Brine. And obviously there's some concern from some property owners that are on the west side of Brine. I'm just wondering how these borders were determined and the rationale behind it. And I know from my perspective, especially with Brine Drive, because the commercial district does allow for a residential component to be built, would it not be more aesthetically pleasing to be able to have that residential component on both sides of Brine Drive, opposed to only having it on one side? I was just wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Harvey, thank you for the question, because it did hit a bit on what Councillor Reitmo was asking about, what are the exceptions that are actually, and of course, as always, when you finish the answer, you're like, oh, I should have said this. So absolutely, the commercial, I can talk to you very briefly about the commercial conundrum, if you will. So there are several properties that for sure in the first draft of the official plan, we're designated commercial in the current OP, and we're designated commercial in the first draft. If you recall, after the first draft, before the first draft, but our second draft had to accommodate more people and more jobs. And so that's where we saw some of the commercial designations change to the employment area non-industrial. And so in this, not all of them, but some of them, and the boundary, I guess, if you will, was really about what was around the surrounding neighborhood. So let's use Bayfield Drive quickly as an example. A lot of that commercial designation didn't change in the previous versions. It was commercial at the beginning and it's commercial at the end. And what's the difference is because really around that are commercial uses and neighborhoods. If you use your Mapleview Drive and Brine Drive example, they were commercial, some of these sites. And then once we had to accommodate for more jobs, they did go to the non-employment area industrial. We did hear this concern. And so we said, you know what, exactly, if you're sitting there as a commercial plaza and you now have been designated as employment area non-industrial, one, it's because we recognize commercial commercial uses contribute to jobs. And two, exactly, you should be able to continue to develop in accordance with the commercial designation. And we've added that in. In addition, the neighborhood, the non-industrial actually can also be used for industrial. So this non-employment industrial can, if it's existing commercial, it can be redeveloped in accordance with commercial. It could be the non-employment industrial, or it actually can use the employment industrial. The difference is the residential. So in the areas where the commercial has switched to employment area non-industrial, it is because it's surrounded most often by employment. And we really, staff don't believe residential uses are that compatible with our industrial land. And that's, I guess, the soundbite. And if you use the Brine Drive as an example, council is looking at extending Brine Drive. We want to have more employment area there. So you do have commercial district on one side of Brine, then you have the employment area non-industrial, and you move further into the industrial. So it really is a ribbon. You've heard me talk about the official plan, the land use plan being like a coloring book, and it really is a coloring book. You can see the ribbon of those land use changes, but you're right. Some existing commercial developments that are now surrounded by industrial lands, staff have said, yes, you can redevelop as commercial and intensify your commercial. Staff don't think that residential uses are appropriate there. Doesn't mean they can't bring in an official plan amendment and try to convince staff otherwise and say that residential is appropriate. But that's the story of how we came to be with these designations. And I do hope that makes sense to you. We have heard that loud and clear. Staff have done a lot of work on trying to make those transitions. But really the biggest change is because we had to accommodate more jobs from the first draft to the second draft, we had to go back and look at everything. And that did impact some of those property owners.
Thank you very much for the detailed answer. And I might have to play that soundbite back if I get further inquiries, because that explanation was far better than I would ever be able to explain it.
Thanks, Councillor Harvey. Any other questions for Ms. Banfield? Then I'll just ask you too, in conclusion, Ms. Banfield, certainly we're at the start of a 3-week gap before this comes to council or planning committee again for debate. So I do anticipate, and this is sort of my first question, I do anticipate there will be many last minute submissions, if you will, letters to you, copied to council and so forth from different organizations, as well as different landowners who have an interest in seeing a change in the plan. This is often what happens with official plans, is a flurry of last minute requests as the rubber hits the road, as you sort of say. One of the biggest challenges that council can be faced with is rather than attempting to deal with 100 one-off requests from individual properties, trying to stay out of the weeds, as we should as city council, and yet be fair to all, and keep the best interests of our residents in mind. So I guess what I would ask you is, as councillors receive submissions, which we're all going to read and consider, how will staff be receiving these series of requests for changes and trying to make sense of them in terms of being fair to different landowners and not compromising what's really important in the plan?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, or to you, Mayor Lehman, apologies. A couple things, I guess. Some of the submissions we've seen lately, you actually can see how they've provided comments to us before, and I would the matrix is quite a large document, but it does actually we can make sure that we can provide it to you in a searchable form, and you could actually go and look at ours, because we responded to everything. Obviously, we're going to be hearing, or council is going to be hearing from people that didn't see the changes that they wanted, and so we're happy to just provide really any insight to council on our position, staff's position, and why we didn't make that change.
Okay, and I think Councillor Harvey's question was a very good one. I can imagine that question and others like it will be asked of all 11 of us, and rather than 11 of us emailing you and then you trying to respond to us, or some emailing on some issues and not others, do we have a centralized sort of process for this, like the budget, where we can submit the concern and receive the answer back? Because I think all of us as councillors as well will want to provide, as Councillor Harris would say, a fulsome answer to those making inquiries. And so, it's probably a good idea over the next 3 weeks for us to sort of have a bit of, centralized process. Then you're not doing work 10 times or 4 times or 8 times, but just once. But we're also all equipped to provide the responses to the rationale behind a particular policy or a choice on the mapping.
Through your Mayor Lehman, it is very similar to budget. There is the dedicated email address that any members of council can put their emails to, or most times staff are circulated on these submissions, and so we absolutely can provide our answer that to all members of council, so that everybody is hearing the same information at the same time, and we'll do it as, again, similar to budget, kind of the questions that come in each week. We won't wait till the very end. We'll do a batch answer, and as always, if there's someone that you've got a meeting or something set up and you need an answer sooner rather than later, certainly happy to oblige.
Okay, that's great. So I'll just switch gears for my other question, which is take it right back to the very highest level in terms of the official plan. We set out as council our strategic priorities at the beginning of our term. And previous councils have also set out some goals for how the city is to grow in the coming years. One of the most important things, I think, for our residents and for previous and current councils is that Barrie isn't a bedroom community going forward, that we continue to grow our employment base and the opportunities for people to live and work in our community. And maybe you could just touch on, because some of the previous questions started to address some of the details of how we accomplish that. But at a high level, how is this document moving us closer to being a complete community and avoiding becoming a bedroom community?
Thank you for the question, Mayor Lehman. And really, it does come back to the fact that we're required to plan for people and jobs. And so some of the, so as I said, that's where it kind of comes down to. I don't think anybody's going to argue that the residential piece is, quite frankly, taking care of itself. But almost every other land use other than residential, we have to protect. And that's where you see some of those strong policies in there about, where residential uses can happen and where they can't. And so also the main themes of the whole official plan, like that's the vision. That's what we heard from our community. Our community wants us to be urban and complete. We know how important urban design is. We know how important the cycling and the mobility, the waterfront, the green city, resilient city, trying to respond to climate change, and prosperous and cultural, like those main themes of the official plan didn't come from me. It came from our community. And so that's where it all kind of comes down to. And then, we said we have identified areas in the official plan for some increased density. We, encourage mixed use in a lot of our developments. And what I like about some of the policies in our official plan is that we're talking about contextual planning, like true community planning. And if you have a development, we've got policies that say what's happening 450 meters around you. What's happening 450 meters around you is going to impact how high you should be or how dense you should be. So all of these pieces go together to make sure that all of those pieces, we have a new community hub designation that recognizes the importance of churches and schools and the value that they provide to our community, but also know that they change over time and try to put some of those policies into play. So it's something that I, certainly feel passionate about, but, all these pieces go together. And it's in particular when you get one landowner saying, I need this on my site. And I certainly don't dispute that they're speaking from the heart. But the job of the official plan is to set the vision for years to come. And it's to set the vision for the community, because obviously, every new development is an opportunity for the residential developments for people to move into our community. Every commercial development, every industrial development are more jobs. Every new church and school is a new community hub. Brings in more parks and trails. As I said, it all works together, and that's why you have to read the plan all together. So I'm probably a little bit longer of an answer that you wanted, but as I said, they really all do just tie in. And, we have marching orders from the province. We have to do that. We have to kind of look this far into the future, and we have to plan for people and jobs.
All right. Well, lots to read, lots to consider. Thank you very much. And I think on the just on that, the process from here, the two-way street of council feeding you questions through a dedicated email, and then planning staff feeding out the answers to the inquiries to all members of council is a really good idea, so that we can be equipped to respond to the inquiries that we receive over the next 3 weeks. And certainly we will submit those questions to you so that we can get the answers from staff. So that's helpful. Thank you very much for being here, making the presentation. And we will, of course, be talking about this again in 3 weeks.
Thank you.
And with that, members of Planning Committee, we will move on to the deferred business, which is the only other item on tonight's agenda. That is with regards to, let me just call up all the addresses here, but it's 407, 411, 413, 417, and 419 Mapleview Drive. This was deferred by motion 21P34 on December 7th. Would someone care to, well, sorry, this is actually on Planning Committee's agenda for tonight, so it's automatically here on the floor. But Councillor Harvey, as the ward councillor, I know you've been engaged with the file, so to speak. So why don't I hand things over to you for your comments and any proposed amendments.
All right. Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I did defer this and because I was very much anticipating that some good discussions were going to take place between the applicant and the residents, along with their planner that they have retained. Unfortunately, the discussions didn't quite come to fruition the way I would have expected or anticipated, because I was advised that right off the bat, at the beginning of those discussions, they were advised by the applicant that the biggest concerns that they had with the height and density was not something that they were willing to discuss at all, and that it was a nonstop issue when it came to that. I then, because nobody had reached out to me, I then reached out to the applicant myself too, and I too last Friday was given the exact same response, that they did not want to have any discussions about the key point of height and density. Like, I mean, the residents know something's going to get built here. I know something's going to get built here. And to be quite honest with you, this area does need to be redeveloped. It's very, very old bungalows, and a new build will definitely make the area much more attractive. It's just a matter of what's appropriate to be built to conform and create a good transition with the area, because this is a low density area surrounded predominantly by bungalows, especially on the Mapleview side. And especially when I spent that afternoon knocking on doors to the 42 homes that are the closest in proximity that would have the most impact with this new development. And it was quite clear that everybody I spoke to had concerns other than one resident. And it just goes to show you the amount of concern that this type of height and density has caused to the neighbors in the area. It's, in my opinion, not a good transition when you're going from low density all the way up to high density, because they're requesting 72 units per hectare. And it's not an intensification corridor. If I could get our IT people to put up the video clip that I sent. So what I want to do is virtually bring you along Mapleview Drive. Obviously everybody's been through the area at some point in time. However, some it may have been quite a distance. As you see, it starts off with commercial on both sides at the corner. And then you've got some 2 stories on the north, a large house that's turned into some office space. And then as you go further along on the south side, it begins with a series of bungalows. And on the north side is people's backyards backing onto to Mapleview Drive. The proposed development is on the left-hand side of the screen on the south side. It would cover 5 of the bungalows in the area that we just passed. As we move up, you'll see that it's predominantly made up of bungalows, and then you get into some 2 stories, however, not directly on Mapleview Drive. And then off to the right-hand side, we'll be passing 2 churches. And you'll see that it's very open, low-density area. And again, on the left side, on the south, you've got a series of 2 stories and some back splits whose backyards back onto Mapleview. And then as we hit Marcellus, we've got a plaza on the north side. And on the south side here are the closest townhouses that are on a street just off of Mapleview. And then as we pan around, you will see that is our largest building that we have in the area. That is over 250 meters to the west of the proposed development. That is a seniors building at 3 stories and abuts to the side and behind a series of 2-story towns. And you'll see there's quite a large setback at the rear because that's where their parking lot is located. And then we
Sorry, I couldn't quite hear you.
That was Siri talking to me. As we know, Siri's always listening. As we come back, we'll get back to the proposed development here in a moment. But as you can see, it's all predominantly 2-story homes in the side streets off of Mapleview. And then as we pan, we're hitting Redfern Drive now. And as we pan in behind, you will see the homes that are in behind the subject lands that are sitting on much larger properties. It's an older, more mature area that is still on septic and they have ditches opposed to city sewers. And then as you pan in, so this development would cover the 5 homes just to the rear of what we can see on our screen now. And as you can see, especially that one property to the right, their pool is literally right at the rear fence yard, which would be abutting up to the proposed development. And as you can see across the road, you've got all those row of 2-story homes with their backyards. And with the proposed development being 4.5 stories at the front with rooftop terraces, that would cause a significant privacy issue for those people across the road. And as you can see, as we pan out, this is a very low density single and semi-detached ward. And projects like this, there's lots of areas that this would be suitable. And as you can see, Essa Road is one of them. And also too, with it being a secondary intensification corridor, where the target is a minimum 50 units per hectare, it would be much more appropriate for a development of this size to be out on that secondary intensification corridor. And I will just get you to flip over to the PowerPoint quickly if I could. Great, thank you. And we can go to the next slide. So here's a shot, and this is an exact slide taken from the public meeting one of the residents had used in his presentation that shows the view from the south, and the rectangle that's highlighted is the 5 subject properties where they want to build the proposed 46 units. The current project is constructed of 2 blocks of 4.5-story back-to-back, or stacked towns, I should say, at the front. And then at the rear, there were 3 blocks of towns that were 3 stories tall for a total of 46 units. If we could hit the next slide, please. It's fairly close to scale. It might not be exactly close to scale. However, this is the exact renderings that were provided in the applicant's paperwork that would demonstrate potentially what the change in sight lines for those residents on Redfern would be, even with my proposed amendments, to be quite honest with you. Next slide, please. And then as we take a look from the opposite side, looking south across Mapleview, you can see the 5 subject houses, which starts with the 3rd one to the west of Redfern Avenue there. Next slide, please. And with my amendments, this is potentially what the sight lines would be changed to. Shortly, I will propose some amendments that will bring the front block down to the allowable RM2, which is 10 meters, which would still allow them to build 3-story towns along the front and the same at the rear, which is a much more responsible transition when we're dealing with bungalows on either side. Next slide, please. And this is more of a slide that would show the height variance when it comes to, and this is exact photos of the bungalows and the backsplit that's on the right, that would show the height transition between their homes and what's being proposed. And this is the lower, the 3-story block that I will be proposing in my amendment, whereas they're proposing in their proposal to be at 4.5 stories with rooftop terraces, which is just such a dramatic difference and provides no transition from low density and immediately takes it to a high density development. Next slide, please. And again, here's another shot that shows a more appropriate transition that occurred many, many years ago. I've personally been a resident in this ward for almost 23 years now, and I know when this building was built, I don't recall anybody creating any concerns, because you've got to transition from the 3 stories with appropriate setbacks with a 2-story adjacent to it. Next slide, please. Now, this is an example of some townhomes that we have just further up on Essa Road, just a little bit north of Mapleton. And this is an example that with my amendment, bringing the front blocks down to 3 stories, that you can still build stacked townhouses if you so wish. These units have been there since about the early 90s, I believe, because I know a friend of mine that lived in there moons ago, and there was literally just farm fields around it. But it is a good example, the fact that you don't have to go 4.5 stories to be able to build appropriate sized back or stacked townhouses. And we can exit out of that slide deck if we want. So Mapleview is not an intensification corridor, as I've probably mentioned a few times already. And the proposed application is 310 meters away from Essa Road, which is a secondary intensification corridor. And as I mentioned earlier, if this project was on Essa Road, the dialogue would be very different with the proposed density of 72 units on a secondary intensification corridor. However, 72 units on Mapleview, that is not a secondary intensification corridor beside bungalows, is not smart planning in my opinion. This entire area is zoned RM1, whereas RM2 is being requested with a whole host of special provisions, as the project doesn't even come close to meeting any of the requirements in the RM2 zoning, which permits a maximum density of 40 units per hectare and a maximum height of 10 meters, whereas they're requesting 12.5 meters to bring it to 4.5 stories at 72 units per hectare. Under the current OP, this is designated a residential area, and there, in the third draft, there is no proposed changes to this area, as it will remain a residential area. We all want more homes built in Barrie, and we know it's much needed to help the stock and hopefully bring down the housing boom that we're currently in. But we can't do this at all costs to our residents just to meet growth targets outside of an intensification corridor, especially when an application like this far exceeds the prescribed density levels, with them being almost twice what's allowed under RM2. We can see previous applications where we've had disapproval similar to this from residents, and applicants have been very open and come back with significant revisions, like we saw in Ward 5 on Miller Drive, where the proposal went from a series of townhomes to a series of single dwelling homes, satisfying the concerns of the residents. And actually, about a month ago, we also had a condo tower on Bayfield and Sophia that went from 34 stories all the way down to 12 stories because of those same types of concerns. In a presentation that staff conducted back in January of 2020, it spoke of various density levels for each built form, with townhouses being targeted for a density between 42 and 54 units per hectare. Schedule 1 of the city's current official plan specifically identifies Essa Road as a secondary corridor with a target of 50 units per hectare, which is a significant variance in the density from this application that's not on an intensification corridor. The requested density would set a new bar for levels along Mapleview Drive, as no other development previously approved of this sort comes close to this density. And even when we look at the large parcel of land that we did have a neighborhood meeting on in the northeast corner of Mapleview and Essa, which is a large 25-acre parcel, even under the new OP, that is still being designated as a mid-density area. And that's right at the corner of this major intersection that is part of the secondary intensification corridor. In my opinion, I don't think we're really following the OP with considering applications of this magnitude, especially when we're dealing with a low density area and we're considering approving a high density build. It just doesn't fit, and it does not follow our current OP and it's not following our potential new draft OP that we just discussed a little while ago. So as a result, I have a series of amendments that I'm going to propose. I'm going to bring them all forward as one. This was circulated to everybody ahead of time, and I think this will be a good compromise that will bring it from a low density into a mid density with a much better transition from the two built forms, and will still allow the developer to be able to build significant volumes of towns, however, at 3 stories instead of the 4.5 that would tower over the neighborhood. So I will go through them one by one. Section A, that piece is not changing at all. Section B of the recommended motion would be to change the permitted landscape open space lot area to 35%, whereas 35% is the minimum requirement. Leaving C alone, permitting the maximum lot coverage area of 50%, which 35% is the maximum. So that gives them an additional 15% over what's allowed. D, I'm also leaving alone, which would permit the gross floor area percentage of the lot area at 120%, whereas the maximum is only 60%. This provides them with a lot of additional wiggle room with any changes that would be required with these amendments. And then also with F would be to permit a maximum density of 53 units per hectare, whereas the maximum of 40 to 53 units per hectare are permitted. G, that one's not changing at all, to permit the required amenity space areas can be provided as unconsolidated, whereas consolidated amenities are normally required. And then I am adding H to permit a rear yard setback of 10 meters, which is something that was agreed upon in the meeting and is contained in the literature from IPS that we all received. I permit a minimum west side setback of 17.4 meters as identified in the current site plan. That is staying in sync with what the current site plan shows for that setback. And J, to permit a minimum east side setback of 14.6 meters as identified in the current site plan. And again, that's keeping in check with their current setback in their proposal. K, the perimeter fence be a minimum of 1.8 meters and a maximum of 2.4 meters, with the rear fence being a minimum of 2.14 meters, and that the fence will remain the ownership of the future condominium board. This was something that was discussed, not contained in his literature, but this was discussed in the first meeting, and seemed that it was something that the applicant was definitely okay with. Then I, that the rear second story decks on the traditional townhouse units be a maximum deck area of 2.55 square meters, which would be 1.5 meters by 1.7 meters, along with a rear yard setback of 8.5 meters. And again, that's something that's agreed upon in the literature from IPS. M, that any stacked or back-to-back townhouses not have a deck any larger than 28.5 square meters, whereas 12 square meters is the maximum permitted. And again, that's giving them more than twice the allowable for any decks that would be off stacked or back-to-back towns on the property. That the rooftop terraces not be permitted on the subject properties. And obviously I'm bringing that one forward because that was a really big concern from the residents in regards to privacy issues, even from the residents on the opposite side of Mapleview, whose backyards would be facing the front area of these rooftop terraces. In my opinion, these amendments provide a very similar built form to what they've proposed, other than bringing the front blocks from 4.5 stories down to 3 stories. It's still large at 3 stories and 53 units per hectare, which will still allow them to build up to 34 units, as the subject properties are 0.64 of a hectare. This provides a lot of movement with the gross floor area being double what is allowed under the zoning. This will create a more appropriate transition from low to mid density, opposed to low to high density without a transition. And actually, that's the end of my comments. So I will obviously available for any questions if members of council have it.
Okay, just a couple of things of clarification before we get into discussing this this amendment, Councillor Harvey. So I think you'd added a new paragraph 6. Did you want to just introduce that as well, please?
Good catch, Mayor Lehman. I unfortunately I printed it out on black and white, so it only shows gray instead of red the way it was. Yes, to add a paragraph 6, that as many trees as possible on the subject lands be retained that are in good health in accordance with the City of Barrie policies and approved by city staff, DEV 026-21 and file D30-003-2020.
Okay, and that one's pretty self-explanatory, so thanks for that. Just by way of clarification as well, I'm going to run back to paragraph 2 here, where you introduced a number of additional items. H, I, and J are to permit minimum setbacks. I think you, and we can go to the planning staff here, but I think you want to say require, unless I'm mistaken. These are setbacks that are larger than the typical required. So it's, I don't think we'd be permitting a minimum. We would be requiring that setback. Is that your intent? Basically, the developer has proposed these setbacks and you want to hold them to it in the zoning, or am I misinterpreting?
Yeah, no, that's correct, Mayor Lehman, and definitely the word require is much more appropriate than permit. Okay,
so it'd be to require a rear yard setback of 10 meters, require a minimum west side setback of 17.4 and an east side setback of 14.6 meters. Okay, so just with that, I will open the floor for debate on Councillor Harvey's amendment. Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Mayor Lehman. I have a few. I'll ask one and then I'll leave it. It was pretty much to that. The new proposals. Through you to the mover, you've made comments of they agreed upon like a 10-meter setback and 17.4 meters. I don't really, I guess what I'm saying is you've asked them to reduce their density, their heights, but hold the things obviously you like the permitted setbacks 7 meters in the rear. The rear setbacks are 7 meters. So like introducing all these amendments, it's drastically different to the proposal. Would it not be better just to not vote in favor of the staff report? Because I just can't see somebody submitting a plan and you keeping what's interested to your residents and changing everything else. It's they give and take, right? Where it's just, it doesn't look that way. So I was just curious, you know, if they held to the official plan, they would be allowed to build at 7 meters, not at 10. They were doing that as a compromise because they had the height, and you know, the further away, the less impactful the height is. So I'm just curious, and then I'll leave that to hear some other comments.
Sorry, was that a question to Councillor Harvey, Councillor Thompson, or is that your comment? Better to vote against it than try and amend it in this way.
Yeah, it was pretty much a question, just like
okay.
to try to amend it. Like I just was curious why, like he had Councillor Harvey had kind of stated that he really didn't have much conversation back and forth with the defer of this. So, you know, to look at the amount of amendments, and we did receive them, you know, 19 minutes before the meeting, it's hard to see what the impact is, you know, of what all these amendments would actually do. I know he showed some drawings and stuff, but it would be nice to see exactly, or to absorb it. And I was just curious, one, why to put all the amendments and not just vote it down on the staff report. So maybe you can explain.
Councillor Harvey?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Lehman. Through you to Councillor Thompson. I'll be quite honest with you, we can vote it down. It really doesn't matter to me, to be quite honest with you. What I was trying to do is to still be able to get this to move forward. You're concerned about the setbacks. So these amendments actually don't change the footprint spaces where the blocks of towns could or would be. And that's why I have introduced the side setbacks that are actually exactly what's in the current site plan that they've put forward. And then the rear setback was a discussion that occurred. And that documentation was on the circulation list this week. That indicates that was one of the things that they could agree on with the residents. The only thing out of these amendments that couldn't be agreed upon was the height and the density. The rest of these amendments don't really change the. Oh, okay. My screen went blank for a minute. I thought I lost you. The rest of it does not change the actual layout of the site plan. And it's still, because we did not make any changes with the gross floor area, we're still allowing twice as what's allowable. And that gives them significant movement to be able to make the appropriate modifications. Essentially with this, they could very easily build 4 blocks of 3-story towns, and the setbacks wouldn't need to be moved at all. And whether they decide to have the product as a stacked, or if they decide to change it to a back-to-back, there is more than enough room with this amendment to be able to accomplish that if that's what they wish to build.
Just to follow up, Marilyn. So what my concern is, like, they've agreed to with the residents for the 10-meter setback, but they also had a higher density and much higher height. So you've asked them to basically go back, which they're going to have to, you know, redesign and everything because you've lowered the densities. Right now they could build at 7-meter rear setback, correct? Like the 10-meter was a compromise, but they could build at 7 meters because basically they're going to have to, with these amendments and the changing, it's almost going to be a new application, you know, to not from the beginning, but like a new design. So do you have a fear that if they agreed to this, but they wouldn't agree to some of their compromise that they were trying, you know, to give and take with the residents? So maybe that's to staff, or that they could build at 7 meters. That is permitted under the building permit or bylaw right now.
Under the zoning, Ms. Banfield?
Sorry, under the zone.
Sorry, I don't know if you heard me call on you, Ms. Banfield, but I think Councillor Thompson's looking for that answer.
Sorry, my apologies.
Yeah,
I was looking for all my, like, where's my mute? Unmute. Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Other comments on the amendment? Councillor Rittman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just on that item that Councillor Thompson raises is that, yeah, the zoning right now would permit them to build at a 7-meter setback, but it wouldn't allow them to build townhouses or stacked townhouses at any kind of density. So, you know, it's kind of a give and take, I suppose. But the comment that I was going to make on this one is, this one has kind of bothered me from the beginning because of the lack of fit in the neighborhood. To the one side, we have 2 houses, and to the other side, we have 5 or 6. And this is kind of in the middle, and we have no sense of what is to happen with those 2 houses on the one side and the 4 or 5 houses on the other. So it seems to me that if we're, serious about planning, then we ought to be thinking about, what's the whole street going to look like when we're all finished, and how do we make that happen? And I don't think this addresses that at all. So that's my big concern. And I think Councillor Harvey raises really good questions, because I think we have that same situation in every one of our wards, where we have existing 1-story, 2-story houses. And is it appropriate to put a 4-story building right in the middle of it? And recognize that, we are looking at intensification. But in my view, I think we have to do intensification, and we have to do it right. And it needs to fit into the neighborhood. And when you look at the pictures that Councillor Harvey demonstrated, you see nothing there that is higher than 3 stories, all in that area. So it seems to me that that's the kind of context that this proposal fits into. And I think when I look at Councillor Harvey's proposed amendment, I think that's what exactly he's trying to do, is to try to make it fit much better than what the proposal was. And he's listened to the neighborhood and tried to figure out what is a reasonable development scenario, as opposed to what the developer might be asking for. Because the neighbors have to live with it forever, the developer moves on. So my inclination at this moment is, yeah, we could turn it down and just vote against approval altogether. But I'm not sure that that really moves the ball forward. I'm much more inclined to go with the amendments and see where that takes us, because I think it gives us, it gives the developer a real sense of this is what council is thinking about and considers to be appropriate in this area. So I think that the compromise that the councillor has provided is a reasonable one.
Thanks, Councillor. Other comments on the proposed amendment? Councillor Natalie Harris.
Yeah, I'll just be brief. I'm in support. I know that this has been a pretty intense job for Councillor Harvey to work through this, and especially from the aerial view of where the pools are and how close that would be, and having a rooftop terrace, like looking into your pool, it would be really heartbreaking. So I could keep on going, but I'm going to keep it there with that. I support this, and I agree, Councillor Rietma. It's kind of showing, we need to still keep things reasonable, especially in areas that aren't even intensification areas yet. So, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Harris. Deputy Mayor Ward.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. First, a question for Councillor Harvey. Maybe I missed it, but do you know how many units this is going to allow? You talked about units per hectare, but how many units would this? It was 46 now. How many would this allow? Do you know? Your amendments.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Lehman, to Deputy Mayor Ward, it puts them at the top of the allowable units per hectare at 53 units per hectare. And with this being 0.64 of a hectare, when you do the math, it would allow up to 34 units instead of the proposed 46.
Okay. And the next question, I had a specific question about number K, about the height of the fence. Where is that coming from? I mean, that's new completely. There wasn't anything about a fence in the original staff report, was there? Councillor Harvey?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Deputy Mayor Ward. Yeah, there is nothing specific that I recall in the staff report about this. Again, this comes back to the discussions when I was a part of that meeting back in December, where discussions around privacy concerns and there was discussion around the residents along Redfern preferring a fence that would be at least 7 feet tall. And then obviously there was concern about who would maintain this fence that's required because of this being a new development that is going to be in the middle of existing homes. So that's where that amendment came from.
Okay, I guess I have a question for staff. I believe our current bylaw doesn't allow fences over 2 meters. Is that correct? Does somebody on staff know?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Deputy Mayor Ward, we actually do allow them. It's just they have to be set back. They're treated as an accessory structure, so they have to be set back from the property line.
Okay, and that would be the case in this one, I'm assuming.
Through you to Councillor Harvey, I believe you'd be looking for it on the property line, not set back in from the property line. It would have to be 0.3 meters from the lot line, and it would be considered an accessory structure.
And Councillor Harvey wants to comment.
Sure, Councillor Harvey.
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Yes, that was the understanding in those discussions that, especially because of the ownership being retained by this new condo board that would exist after the homes are built, that yes, it would have to be built just inside the property line.
Okay, and last thing is it's sort of a comment and a question. And I mean, I actually like seeing these specific things before us. And in fact, I had a conversation with Councillor Harvey on the weekend. I encouraged him to do something. I'd be more comfortable if we actually directed this to staff to say, can you comment on this and put it back to come up with a new proposal with these parameters. We're kind of approving a development tonight without any of the staff report that goes with it. And I guess I'd feel more comfortable if we were actually referring this back to staff. Say, here are our parameters. We don't want anything more than 10 meters. We want these setbacks, this density. Come back to us with the report. I guess it bothers me that we're kind of doing this tonight and we're not sure of all the consequences of maybe some of the things we're doing. So I'm a little uncomfortable passing it tonight. I know we can always, at council in next week or 2 weeks, we can always refer it back to staff. But I don't know if Councillor Harvey wanted to comment on that, of whether we want to have a new staff report or we just want to make these amendments tonight.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Actually, I would actually have to ask the clerk or Ms. Banfield a procedural question on this, because I'll be quite honest with you, I haven't crossed this path yet. We have a positive staff report recommending the proposal that was brought forward by the applicant, and obviously I've brought several amendments forward to reduce the height and the density. Are they even permitted to come up with a new staff report with these new parameters? If that's the case, I'm definitely supportive of it. I'm just not sure if we're procedurally allowed to do that.
Yeah, I'll let Ms. Cook and Ms. Banfield comment. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman, and 2 members of the Planning Committee. Council can direct anything back to staff with the parameters. So if you want to direct staff to prepare a new report with the recommendations, that can be done. And Ms. Banfield had just sent me a message that this can, in her opinion, this could also be done.
Okay, thanks for that.
I just ask Councillor Harvey if he'd be amenable to that, whether we could get a staff report with these new parameters, we could actually see what it would look like, and maybe even give staff the description. So if they wanted to vary it by a foot here or a foot there, I mean, it wouldn't make much difference. But I'd like to see a whole new staff report with these parameters rather than approving it tonight and then again in 2 weeks.
Yeah. Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Deputy Mayor Ward. Yes, I am very open to that. I think in the end, it still accomplishes everybody's goal to have something built there, just something that fits better within the community with the transition from low to mid density. So with that in mind, I will put a referral motion on the floor to refer this matter back to staff and to come back to planning committee with a new planning report using the parameters within the previous amendments that I placed on the floor.
Okay, members of planning committee, are you clear what Councillor Harvey's now proposing? Okay, it is a referral motion, which unfortunately ends debate. So I will, if we're all clear on what we're voting on, now the referral motion, just so you're aware of process, the referral motion will come to City Council. Of course, you know, we may well hear from the applicant, we may hear from the community or otherwise at City Council at that date. But for tonight, what you would be doing, we would be ending debate now if the referral motion carries, and it would be to refer the matter back to staff with the parameters that have been outlined in Councillor Harvey's amendment. That's clear? Okay. Councillor Thompson, question of process?
Yes, Mayor Lehman. Maybe you could. So you're saying that obviously this comes to City Council for ratifying the referral motion. Is that where you mean that we could hear from the developer or the planner, sorry, and that at that time where they could basically say that they wouldn't want to participate in another staff report? Staff can obviously go ahead and do the report, but is that what you're saying?
Well, under all council procedure, yeah. So even though it's a referral motion that we can't further debate tonight because of our procedural bylaw, when that section of the planning committee report comes to council, anyone can make a deputation on it. And so that may well be the applicant. I would expect under the circumstances, they will probably want to come and let us know what they think. We may well have others who want to come and let us know what they think at council at that point. But for tonight, it would end the discussion for now. Okay, clear? Okay, then I'll call the question. Those in favor of the referral motion, please indicate. Opposed? I'm also opposed. So that does carry, and that's 8-3. Okay, that completes Planning Committee's business agenda. I believe it means we just have inquiries of staff on planning matters. Deputy Mayor Ward, do you have any inquiries of planning staff?
I have none.
Any member of Planning Committee, any inquiries of staff? Madam Clerk, is there any further business for the committee?
No, Mayor Lehman, there's none.
Okay, thank you all for your attendance tonight, for your questions, and we will see you all for what's up next. Council on or General Committee next Monday night. Okay, thanks everybody. Stay safe.